Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep today into Advaita Vedanta. It's a fascinating branch of Hindu philosophy, all about this idea of non-duality. So, okay, let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah.
With the foundation, right? The Upanishads. These ancient texts are like the seed for all Vedanta philosophy.
Yeah.
But they're full of incredible insights, but they don't really offer like a systematic analysis,
Right. So that's where the Brahma Sutras come in. They were written centuries later, and they're basically like a guidebook, critically examining the Upanishads and trying to sort of organize those teachings.
Okay.
But even before the Brahma Sutras came along, there were already tons of thinkers who were interpreting the Upanishads in their own way, which really shows how rich and how complex this tradition is.
So when do we start to see Advaita Vedanta like as a distinct school of thought? When does that emerge?
Well, we start to get these glimpses of the Advaita perspective in some early texts,
Okay.
like the Sannyasa Upanishads, and these were probably preserved by monasteries that were specifically dedicated to this tradition. And then another really interesting figure is Bhartrhari.
Okay.
He was a 5th century scholar who was super into language and logic, and he even tackled some really complex problems like the liar paradox.
Oh, wow.
Which shows you the level of intellectual depth that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a head scratcher for sure. But what about like the key figure, the people who really shaped Advaita Vedanta?
Well, Gaudapada, a 6th century thinker, is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
He had a huge influence on Shankara, who a lot of people think of as the most famous Advaita philosopher. Gaudapada was all about these concepts of Ajativada, meaning non-origination, and Maya, which is often translated as illusion.
Okay. So is he saying that the world that we experience isn't real?
Well, it's a little more nuanced than that.
Okay.
He proposed that the world is ultimately an illusion, a projection of the mind. And what's really fascinating is that he actually used ideas from Buddhism, like this concept of Vidyaptimatra. It means representation only, to explain how the mind creates our experience of reality. So it really highlights the sort of cross-pollination of ideas that was happening within Indian philosophy at the time.
Gaudapada wrote a famous commentary on the Mattukya Upanishad. It's called the Mattukya Karika.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And it became a really central text for Advaita Vedanta, especially after Shankara. But it's important to know that Gaudapada was a major figure in his own right, not just a stepping stone to Shankara.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Now, this takes us to the late classical period of Hinduism,
Yes.
which was a time of political instability, lots of intense debate between various philosophical and religious schools. And it's here that we encounter two really prominent figures, Matana Mishra and, of course, Adi Shankara.
Absolutely. That was a super vibrant period intellectually.
Yeah.
Matana Mishra was a scholar of both Mimamsa and Advaita, and he wrote a really key text called the Brahma Siddhi. He had this interesting view of errors. He saw them as opportunities for learning and getting closer to truth. And he was actually more prominent than Shankara for centuries.
That's interesting. So how did Shankara, who a lot of people consider the Advaita Vedanta philosopher, how did he rise to prominence then?
Well, there's this legendary story about a great debate that happened between Shankara and Matana Mishra, where Shankara emerged victorious.
Okay.
Now, whether or not that debate actually happened is up for debate.
Right.
But it really symbolizes this intellectual rivalry and this potential for dialogue between these different schools of thought.
Oh, I see.
And Shankara really built upon the ideas of his predecessors, synthesizing them into this very powerful philosophical system.
Right.
And he wrote really influential commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita.
But his impact wasn't immediate, though, was it?
No, it's really interesting. His influence really grew during a period of great upheaval, the Muslim invasions of India.
Yeah.
And it raises this really thought-provoking question. Why would a philosophy centered on non-duality and unity gain traction during such chaotic times?
Yeah. I can only imagine people were just searching for some sense of peace and connection during all that turmoil.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And it highlights how Advaita Vedanta offered a way to understand yourself in the world, not just in times of peace, but also when you're facing some really, really big challenges.
Okay, so after Shankara, we start to see the emergence of different sub-schools within Advaita Vedanta.
Exactly. It's that classic pattern. A brilliant thinker emerges, and then followers debate the nuances of their teachings.
Right.
And after Shankara, different interpretations of key concepts like Maya and avidya, which is the veil of illusion that keeps us from seeing the truth, led to the formation of all these different sub-schools.
Yeah.
And of those, two major ones have survived: the Pamati and Vivarana schools.
I'm kind of curious how those two differ in their approach to Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah, so the Pamati school really focuses on the ontological aspect, the nature of being.
Okay.
They see the individual self as the source of ignorance, like the creator of this illusion of separation. On the other hand, the Vivarana school takes more of an epistemological approach, so focusing on how we know things, and they see Brahman as the source of ignorance.
Okay.
Not in a literal sense, but more like the ground from which ignorance arises.
So it's about how our minds are kind of creating the conditions for us to misunderstand the true nature of reality.
Exactly.
Yep.
And both schools offer really valuable perspectives on this complex and really fascinating philosophy.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part. We've traced the evolution of Advaita Vedanta from its roots in those Upanishads to the emergence of different sub-schools after Shankara, and now this journey takes us into the later medieval period and ultimately to the modern era. And we'll explore how Advaita Vedanta continued to adapt, incorporating influences from other traditions like yoga,
Right.
and eventually even becoming like the dominant philosophical system of Hinduism.
Yes. So stay with us
It's going to be good.
as we continue to unpack
Yeah,
all the intricacies of Advaita Vedanta.
absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the early development of Advaita Vedanta,
Right.
but now we're moving into this period, this later medieval period,
Yeah.
where the historical records get a little bit, they get a bit fuzzy.
That's true. There's still a lot that that we're learning about this era.
Yeah.
But we do know that this living tradition of Advaita Vedanta kept evolving.
Okay.
And it even started to incorporate elements from other traditions, like yoga.
See, that's interesting to me, because you wouldn't necessarily think of yoga with its emphasis on physical practice and Advaita Vedanta with its focus on non-duality, like going hand in hand.
Yeah, you might be surprised.
Okay. Texts like the Yoga Vasista and the Bhagavata Purana, which have strong Advaita leanings, they started to gain prominence during this time. And they kind of integrated yogic practices and ideas into this Advaita framework. So it's a good reminder that Advaita Vedanta isn't just an intellectual pursuit,
Right.
but something that can be like embodied
Yeah.
and experienced through practice.
So it's not just about understanding the concepts,
Yeah.
but it's about actually integrating them into your life, bringing them into practice.
Yeah. And it was during this period, around the 14th century, that Advaita Vedanta really solidified its position as like the dominant school of Hindu philosophy.
Wow.
And a lot of this was thanks to figures like Vidyaranya, who was this brilliant scholar and a strong advocate for Advaita during the Vijayanagara Empire.
But then, of course, comes the colonial period,
Right.
which was a time of just immense change for India. So how did this impact the development of Advaita Vedanta?
Well, this is when we see this rise of Neo-Vedanta. And it emerged as a response to Western Orientalism, which, you know, often presented a very narrow and sometimes distorted view of Eastern traditions.
So Hindu intellectuals were engaging with these Western interpretations and trying to present Advaita Vedanta in a way that, like, resonated with a modern global audience.
Exactly. They really wanted to highlight this universal and inclusive nature of Advaita Vedanta and its potential to kind of transcend cultural and religious boundaries. And figures like Swami Vivekananda and Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, they played key roles in popularizing this interpretation.
Vivekananda was especially influential in bringing Advaita Vedanta to the West.
He was. He presented Advaita Vedanta as like this spiritual path that could offer profound insights to people from all backgrounds. And his teachings really resonated with a lot of people in the West who were looking for this deeper understanding of themselves and the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how this ancient philosophy continued to evolve and adapt to these new contexts.
It really is. And it speaks to the enduring power of that core message, you know, the unity of all things, this interconnectedness of reality.
Okay, so we've journeyed from the ancient Upanishads to the rise of Neo-Vedanta. What are some of like the key takeaways from this deep dive into Advaita Vedanta?
Well, first and foremost, I think we've seen that it's not this monolithic tradition.
Right.
It's this really rich tapestry of ideas and interpretations and practices that have evolved over centuries.
Yeah, always adapting and responding to the challenges of the time.
Exactly.
Right.
And at its heart, Advaita Vedanta offers this really profound vision of non-duality.
This idea that ultimately all distinctions are illusory,
Yeah.
and we are all interconnected and part of the same underlying reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this vision has really profound implications for how we understand ourselves, the world, and our place within it. It challenges us to look beyond surface appearances and recognize that underlying unity that connects us all.
It's like a call to awaken to the true nature of reality.
Yes.
And it's a journey that's resonated with countless individuals throughout history
Absolutely.
and continues to inspire seekers today.
And it's important to remember that it's not just a philosophical system.
Right.
It's a lived tradition. It's a path of self-discovery and realization that can completely transform our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's about embodying those insights in our daily lives.
Yes.
It's a journey that can lead to a really profound sense of liberation.
It really can. And that's really what Advaita Vedanta ultimately points to. The realization of our true nature, which is, freedom from the limitations of the ego, from that illusion of separation.
So it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
It's a path of transformation.
Exactly. And it's a path that's open to anyone who's willing to inquire, to explore, to go beyond the surface level of reality.
Dive deep, as we've done today.
Yes. And speaking of diving deep, I'm kind of left with a question. Given Advaita Vedanta's emphasis on non-duality, how can it account for all the vast diversity of individual experiences and the world's complexities? If everything is ultimately one, then why do we perceive such a rich tapestry of differences?
Yeah, it's like that saying, unity and diversity. How can we reconcile the idea of oneness with this undeniable reality of our individual experiences and the complexities of the world around us?
It's a profound question, and I think that's where the real challenge of Advaita Vedanta lies.
Okay.
Not just in grasping this concept of non-duality, but in actually living it, integrating it into our experience of the world.
So bridging the gap between the absolute and the relative.
Exactly.
This ultimate unity and the diversity that we perceive.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, it's like we're trying to hold both those ideas, like absolute unity and individual experience in our minds at the same time.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. And that's where I think the real beauty of Advaita Vedanta lies, you know. It doesn't try to erase the richness of our individual lives or the complexity of the world. Instead, it invites us to see them in this new light, to recognize that underlying oneness that sort of permeates everything.
So how does Advaita Vedanta reconcile this idea of oneness with the very real, differences that we all experience?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine a vast ocean.
Okay.
On the surface, you've got all these countless waves. Each one is unique, rising and falling, seemingly separate.
Right.
But beneath the surface, they're all connected. They're all part of the same body of water. And so Advaita Vedanta suggests that our individual experiences, like those waves, are real and they're valid. But they're also expressions of a deeper underlying reality, which is that unity of Brahman, like the vastness of the ocean.
That's a really beautiful analogy. So are you saying that our sense of individuality is an illusion?
Not quite. It's more about understanding the nature of that individuality. From the perspective of Advaita Vedanta, our true self, the Atman, isn't separate from Brahman. Right.
It's a spark of that divine consciousness, experiencing itself as an individual.
So it's like we're all individual expressions of the same, divine source.
Exactly. And recognizing that interconnectedness can lead to this really profound shift in how we see ourselves in the world around us. It can really cultivate a sense of compassion and understanding and unity.
So this deep dive into Advaita Vedanta has been quite a journey.
It has.
We've traced its evolution from the ancient Upanishads through different interpretations and all those sub-schools. All the way to its modern expression.
Absolutely.
And along the way, we've encountered all these fascinating figures and all these profound concepts and all these thought-provoking questions. But I think one of the most important takeaways for me is that Advaita Vedanta is not just this abstract philosophy.
No, it's not.
It's a living tradition, a path of self-discovery and transformation.
It is. It's an invitation to explore the depths of our own being and to realize our true nature, which is freedom and unity and boundless awareness.
And as we wrap up our deep dive, I really want to encourage you, our listeners, to continue exploring this on your own. Go delve into the Upanishads,
Yeah.
explore Shankara's commentaries, and most importantly, ask your own questions. Seek your own understanding.
Let this be just the beginning of your journey into Advaita Vedanta. Discover that wisdom that really resonates with you.
Right.
And see how it can, illuminate your life and deepen your connection to yourself and to the world around you.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
See you later.